This is Saskia, and this is Note to Self, your weekly dose of everything that's simply too long to text. Consider this your personal invitation into my inner circle, where I share my thoughts, feelings, and quiet reflections that usually live inside my Notes app. Thanks for joining me. Hello, and welcome back to Note to Self. Excited to have you here for another episode. And we are kicking things off a little differently this week to how we normally do things. And I'm going to be starting with my pop culture pick of the week because it's just so good and I have to dive into it. It's just been sending me all week. So Jeffrey and I have been catching up on the last few episodes of SNL. And we were a little bit behind. So this episode was from a few weeks ago. It was when Olivia Rodrigo hosted and she was the musical guest as well. The episode honestly was fine, not one of my faves, but it had quite possibly one of my favorite SNL bits that I have ever seen, which is a big call. But Jeffrey had seen it when he was in Vegas because he was away when this episode came out and I hadn't watched it yet and he was just dying for me to see it. So we watched this specific bit. Oh my God, it's so good. Picture this. Two college girls get into an Uber for a night out. They ask for some music to be put on. Low music is playing. The girls are wooing because we love the woo girls. Woo! They are gabbing. They are talking about all the ridiculous things they did last weekend and how they need to stop each other from doing them again this weekend. Meanwhile, their older, very New Yorker, white cab driver starts out of nowhere belting a Jamaican dance hall song, and everything changes from that point on. The girls are taken aback. The cab driver is unable to explain how this happened. I quote, "You have as much information as I do." He then proceeds to explain how he has literally no idea how this has happened, and he's now discovered that he is one of the most talented Rasta MCs on earth. And he's having an existential crisis as he realizes, I quote, "I don't want to be a white Rasta guy," in his very New York accent. He sees no way out, though, other than to share his talents with the world because they all witnessed how capable he is and that this is now his future. The girls are pretty much like, you don't have to do this, dude, but he feels like he cannot let this talent rest. It's really hard to explain an SNL bit. You gotta go watch it. I'll put it in the show notes because, I mean, clearly, I just like lose it every time when he breaks out into this Jamaican dancehall song. It's hysterical. And then him having no understanding as to how it happened. Oh my God, it's so brilliant. I thought it was such a good concept. All I could think about was just whoever pitched that idea going into the pitch room that week and being like, so I have this idea, these two girls getting picked up to go to a party, and the cab driver all of a sudden busts out a Jamaican dancehall song and realizes he's one of the greatest Rasta MCs of our generation. Meanwhile, keep in mind, he's an old white New Yorker. It's just brilliant. And I think this must just be so fun coming up with these crazy ideas and pitching them every week and seeing what flies. To be fair, I have heard the SNL pitch room is kind of scary and the SNL environment is pretty intense generally. But these are the types of sketches that I fucking love. I like humor that they didn't push it too far, but it's so it's not understated, but it's a silly kind of very real life scenario. Everyone can relate to being in an Uber, being a little silly with your girls and drunk, and just like no one can relate to the next part of it. But it's just so funny because it's so absurd, but in a way that isn't too absurd. Because when it's too absurd, then they lose me. But I thought, props to them, one of the best ones they've done. Other than Papyrus, love Papyrus. Those who know SNL know that sketch. It's with Ryan Gosling. It's brilliant. But yeah, fantastic. So hysterical. I keep sending it to Jeffrey. We just can't stop laughing at it. It's brilliant. They must do it again. So yeah, I'm excited to see the next season because the show just wrapped up. for this season. And I feel like they're in this really interesting period where a lot of new cast members are coming through, and they're in this transitional period between a new cast and an old cast. And there's just like some clear stars really coming out of the new cast. And I am just loving seeing, especially the chemistry between some of the older cast members and newer cast members. And I just feel like this group right now is so solid, and I really love them. And I think they were like finding their feet this season. And I think next season's going to be even better. Anyways, back to my regular programming for the update, for my general update before I dive into the topic today. So big news, huge news. I had Botox, guys. So crazy. And it's also a gorgeous, sunny, hot day in New York, because it wouldn't be a Note to Self podcast if I didn't let you know about the weather. It's very steamy. It's super hot. It's unbearably hot. Just classic New York. It's never perfect. Anyways, had Botox. I have only ever done Botox when I got a little lip flip. So I had a few little ones above my lip. Didn't really do anything. So have never got that again. But my esthetician had recommended a cosmetic dermatology practice in the city called Natural Beauty NYC. Shout out, they're great. And I had always been interested in Botox / like a few other treatments that I wanted to explore. And I like the idea of like, I don't want to remove signs of aging at all, but naturally, I guess isn't the word, but in a more natural looking way, age gracefully. I do not want to not have lines, because that's also just part of life and you can't get rid of them. So yeah, I went in mainly to like kind of learn about Botox. I also have this thing under my chin. It's like a genetic, it's just like skin, and most people probably don't notice it, but I do. And I've always been bothered by it. So I went in to kind of ask about that. And I also get melasma above my upper lip. And he was just so amazing. I saw the guy who runs the practice. We had an hour-long consultation, and there was like no expectation to have to like do anything if you didn't want to. And it was quite a lot of information. So it was slightly overwhelming, just because I was like, oh my God, I've never done anything like this before. But in the same vein, I just felt like shared a ton of information, and I didn't feel like I was like pressured into anything, which was great. On the day though, I decided to do a Botox treatment called Nefertiti. I had read about it and I've always been interested in it. And essentially it's just like down your neck, because it stops your neck from drooping. Not that my neck's drooping, but it can help with this thing up with the skin beneath my chin that bothers me. Didn't hurt at all, which I was really worried it was going to hurt. And I had this little squeezy ball and I was like, oh, it's really not that bad. And yeah, it was fun. I haven't noticed a difference yet. I'm looking in the mirror every day, although I do find like my neck feels weird in terms of like movement. And like I got tiny little bits right beneath, if you're on video, you can see it right beneath my chin, I guess, under my mouth. And that feels a little strange as I'm getting used to it. But might do a little bit of preventative Botox when I go back, because I have 2 tiny little lines on my forehead. But, you know, it just felt nice to be able to take like the power into my own hands, I guess. And like, I like that it is something that I'm like not scared of aging, but what are like things you can do to like help your skin in the process. And I am 34, so, you know, time to start looking into it. I have never understood preventative Botox in your 20s. I suppose that's what it's there for, but I'm also like, enjoy your 20s. You don't have to worry about this stuff. Like, who cares? I literally never thought about it in my 20s, but it was a fun quote. It was actually fun. I actually freaking love skincare, so I would say it was fun. And I definitely will keep you updated as I notice the differences. And if I decide to do any other treatments, I really want to do the salmon sperm microneedling. Apparently it gives you a beautiful glow, and that sounds interesting too. Anyways, on top of that, I also had my annual tarot card reading. And I've been doing this since 2022. I love my tarot reader. She's absolutely the best. If you ever need someone, feel free to message me and I can refer you. I've been seeing her for years, and so have a few friends, and we all really love her. And the sessions are great because it's obviously tarot, but she, you know, definitely does coaching, and she also is almost like a therapist. And I find her method really great, and she definitely picks up on a lot of interesting messages. And a lot of the stuff that comes up in session, I often find are things that I've already kind of been ruminating on, or, you know, messages that I've been like working on giving myself. So I always find it very cathartic. And it's not that I plan to do it annually, but usually I get this like annual ping as the feeling to want to do it again and have a reading. And I just feel like it's always a nice way to kind of get you back on track. And I think something that like I always keep in mind is when having these readings is ultimately you have the ability to change anything and like any messages or the trajectory of where the energy is going. I really believe tarot is reading energy, and time isn't linear and it's picking up on energy in the future. But if there's something that you don't want, you can change that. And it all depends on the decisions you make. And in that moment, it's picking up on what you're putting down in that exact moment. But that could change within an hour, within the next week, within the next few years. I know I'm getting really woo-woo here, but this is kind of how I look at it. I feel like I find the messages helpful, but I don't necessarily take them as like final, because I think there's things can always change. And, before I noticed over the years how my like sessions have kind of changed. And I feel like before I met Jeffrey, they were very focused around dating and relationships. And I've noticed now it's moved a lot more into my career and, asking, really focusing on, the success of the podcast. And kind of, we also spoke a lot about just like aging parents and my family. And I just always find it very cathartic and super helpful. And it just gives you like a bit of pep in your step, feeling like you're on the right track. Because I think sometimes we can all kind of feel like maybe we're faltering. And why I like it is it's just important because it often, I find the readings just reiterate back things that I've already been noticing in myself or messages I've already been noting down. So yeah, I really like it. I think it was interesting because one of the strongest messages I got was around being in this kind of cocoon phase right now. And I had shared on the podcast a few weeks ago about this song on the new Ray album, Click Clack Symphony, where the song is all about being in this transitional period and trusting that the seeds you've planted are going to grow. And later that day, I ended up speaking to my therapist about that similar sentiment of like cocooning and then getting ready for like a rebirth and kind of feeling like I'm in this period of transition. And I found it really fascinating because it came up again, obviously, in the tarot reading. And I just think that's so cool where it's like these multiple messages that are coming throughout your life and then they are being reflected back to you in that tarot reading. Okay, so I have a little visitor here with me right now. Come here, buddy. We've got a doggy and I can hear him being sad. It's okay. So I'm looking after Albert. Say hello to note to self. Hello, puppy. He was sitting in my windowsill and I just started to hear him whimpering and I was like, oh no, hope we got hear it in the podcast. Anyways, being in this cocoon period, I just really feel like these tarot readings always really help me. So if you're ever feeling like you need some more messages, please, reach out and I'm happy to send you her way. And I feel like as I'm in this cocoon period, I've just generally been wanting to spend more time at home. And I feel like there's just been so much going on in my life, which I've shared on the podcast before, especially with my dad being sick. And there's a lot of things I'm taking over for my family. And generally, I just am really struggling to kind of manage, work and the podcast and my own life and this family stuff. So I'm often feeling kind of at very little capacity, to say the least. And if I'm being like really honest, I spend a lot of time, I've been really sad and crying a lot and just like feeling very anxious and overwhelmed at times. And I'm trying to do things to keep myself grounded, and things like tarot readings and all of that really do help me stay more grounded and, working out, yoga, etc. And I think just that message of the cocoon period just keeps resonating with me that I don't really need to define this period right now. My therapist shares the same thing. It's just like things are moving and a lot of things are changing. And with change, there's always room for something new. And I actually think it's a very positive feeling. So I share that just because maybe other people are going through it too. And there's times that I think it's better just to allow yourself to feel what you need to feel. And I always feel so much better after I cry and let things out. And I just keep trusting that it's all leading to something new. But really, like the tarot reading just generally got me thinking a lot about the topic today, because I've been sitting with this idea of trusting what comes into your life at this time is meant for you. And that also goes into the connections that arrive in your life. And I think those come in for a reason. And I had mentioned last week that my main topic today was going to be diving into past life connections, otherwise known as karmic relationships or karmic connections. And that feeling when you meet someone where you feel like you've just known them your whole life. And, what is that? And why does that happen? I think there's a really important distinction here, and I have learned this from my own experiences, that I really do believe that karmic relationships and these connections do exist. And there are people from our past lives that we have unfinished business with. We meet them again in this life to try and close that chapter. However, I think it's really easy to mistake a karmic relationship for anxious attachment. And I can say this pretty confidently because I've experienced multiple times where I've felt like I was having a karmic relationship and upon reflection realized I really wasn't. And I do know the times that I really have experienced that karmic relationship, and understanding that just because you have that, it doesn't mean that it's for this life. So I wanted to share some personal experiences of what this has meant for me and how upon reflection, I've been able to tell the difference between a karmic connection and anxious attachment. And I think there's a few signals that you can kind of look at. The first signal is, I think the biggest thing that I take away is when I retell the story of these specific karmic connections, I ask myself, does it feel grounded and emotional, or does it feel anxious and frantic? I think first, I'll start with my biggest karmic relationship and connection. So years ago, I was back home in Australia for Christmas and New Year's, and I was in Byron Bay for New Year's Eve, which is this beautiful little beach town in New South Wales on the east coast of Australia. And one of my friends from New York was visiting, and we had gone to Byron with some of my high school friends. And this is just like a night that will forever be etched in my brain. We'd gone to dinner, and then we were going to this party. And I remember walking into the party, and I'd kind of clocked this like super tall guy as he was entering the party as well. But, didn't think anything of it. We remember we were kind of in this downstairs area for a bit, and then we decided to go to this upstairs mezzanine. And maybe we'd been there for like an hour. And as we walked up the stairs, I made eyes with the guy pretty much like directly as I'm coming up the stairs that I had noticed earlier as we were coming into the party. And I felt just like this immediate pull. And he immediately walked over to me. I just remember just like this instant, just as soon as I arrived at that upstairs level, he did not leave my side. And he was just like in that viewpoint. I don't even remember like standing upstairs for more than 5 seconds before he had come over and was speaking to us. And I have this distinct recollection of standing on that rooftop talking about just life. And I think this was probably within like an hour of us meeting each other. And I distinctly remember him saying, I feel like I've known you before. And I was like, I feel the exact same way. It was this immediate draw. And it was exactly that karmic connection feeling, like we had known each other forever. And I remember the New Year's Eve countdown began, and the song Shooting Stars was playing. Bag Raiders was actually DJing. That's right. So that's why Shooting Stars was playing. And he was my New Year's kiss, obviously. And we continued to party with him and his friends all that night. And the next day, he invited me to this area in Byron called Tea Tree Lake. It's a lake on the beach, and the water has been stained the color of tea tree from the leaves of the trees, and it's a really spiritual place where Aboriginal women would actually go to give birth. So it's known in the kind of local community as a very healing place. And we'd gone there with him and his friends, and I just remember being in the water and just like feeling so connected to this person. And then the next day, he wanted to take me on a date before I left to go back up to where my family was in Australia before I went back to New York. And he picked me up during the day, and we drove up to the Byron Bay hinterland, which is all more kind of rainforest. It's not beachy. And we went to this waterfall. and this local little like Aussie pub that I remember we drove by. And I love like the old school Aussie pubs are in the small towns. They're very like beautiful, almost Queenslander style homes is kind of what they're called. And I just remember just these beautiful, beautiful few days with him that will forever be etched in my brain, and just this deep, deep, deep connection. It was honestly wild at the time. And I left Byron and I was devastated. I was sobbing. Like, I was so sad. And my girlfriend was even like, "You're so sad." And I'm like, "Girl, I don't even know how to describe to you why I'm so sad. It's kind of wild." And we ended up staying in touch. And within a few weeks, we had already talked about maybe we'd go on a trip and meet each other somewhere. And I remember I'd gone back to New York and we were talking about where it was that we could possibly meet. And we landed on Hawaii because Hawaii was pretty much equal distance for me and him between the East Coast of Australia and the East Coast of the US. So we booked this, I think it was 7 to 10 days. I really can't remember. And I remember getting on the airplane and just being like, "Oh my God, I like don't know this guy that well." And I wasn't scared at all in that reason, but it was more like, do I kiss him when I see him? Like, how do I greet him? And I just like couldn't stop thinking about that. And I arrived in Hawaii. He had gotten there earlier. He'd picked up the rental car and he'd picked me up from the airport, and he was like there at the gate, baggage claim or something. And we did kiss immediately as soon as I saw him. And I was like, "Great, that's out of the way." And then it just felt super easy. And honestly, it's still hands down of my single days, my all-time favorite trip with a guy I was dating, bar who I'm with now, Jeffrey. Love you, babe. But my single days, hands down. And I remember every day we would just get up super early and we were hiking, and he was a surfer. So he'd be surfing a ton, and he brought all his boards from Australia, and I would just be sitting on the beach and reading my book. And we would drive all around the island, going to all these little food spots and hiking. And we were staying on Oahu, which is like a pretty big island. And I just felt this connection was so deep and so visceral. And ultimately, it was incredibly heartbreaking because I think both of us, we both knew it couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't willing to leave New York, and he was not willing to leave Byron Bay, and nor would I have wanted that, nor I think would he have wanted that for me either. We had our lives totally like built in those places, and our lives are really different too. I think there was definitely some anxious and avoidant attachment issues at play for sure, just because that was something I was dealing with a lot in that time generally, and something that I generally deal with normally in how I approach my relationships. But I wouldn't necessarily define it as an anxious attached relationship. It did play a part, but there was a karmic connection, and there is one here. And I'm such a romantic, so I think I just really lived in this whole idea of how it might possibly could work. And I didn't even want to think about it not working. Despite like, I'm just reflecting on it now because I'm thinking like I did know it wasn't going to work, but I just don't think I ever even went there. I was like, let's just keep talking and we'll keep talking, and like we'll just keep hanging out and it'll just keep going that way, but not really thinking past that, which I think is a classic thing you do in your 20s anyways. But the last day, I was so sad saying goodbye, and he was getting on the plane first. So I went to his gate. I had a few more hours until my flight left, and he was the last person to get on the plane, and I stood there and watched him. And I remember staring at the gate and seeing him get onto the plane and thinking, if he looks back, it wasn't me that just felt this. And just as he kind of rounded the edge, he looked back, and I just like knew in that moment, all of it was real. It was so real. And I don't know why it was that moment. It just felt like a one last glimpse, and let's have that snapshot that we'll have forever. But beyond all of that, and this beautiful story of being in this beautiful country and having these great experiences together, it was a fantasy. And, we kept in touch for a few months afterwards, having phone calls, but it was extremely difficult not really knowing where it was going to go. And I could feel myself getting more nervous. And I think what was so sad is unfortunately, the way it actually ended was that he ghosted me, which is awful. And I really struggled with it, guys. It was so bad. I was so upset. It took me honestly years to get over it. I was so deeply, deeply, deeply hurt because it felt like everything that I thought was real was maybe not real. And one of the things I loved about him was just how kind he was to me and just this beautiful connection. And it just felt like such a slap in the face. But years later, I actually was living back in Australia. So this was in 2021, I think. And it must have been, I think, 3 or 4 years after all of this had happened. And he had a new partner at this stage. And I was actually in Byron Bay, and I reached out to him to have a coffee. And we grabbed a coffee, and he actually apologized for ghosting and said that ultimately, from like what I can gather in my memory and what I could garner, he was scared, and that he couldn't see it going anywhere because of the situation we were in. And instead of, talking to me about that, it was just easier to avoid it. And he had shared with me he had avoidant tendencies, so should have seen that coming, but clearly didn't. And it was just that perfect storm. But it was so healing to have that conversation. And I remember I cried saying, how much he hurt me. And I did not expect the tears to come. I just kind of like burst into tears. And I think he was like really taken aback. And I remember he dropped me off at the hotel that I was staying at. And it was one of these like really beautiful hotels in Byron. And he kind of like made a comment about that. And I had it like brought back this memory of him in Hawaii saying that he didn't think that he could give me the life that I wanted. And I guess he saw my life as just this fancy city life in New York City, fancy, quote unquote. But if you're from a very small place in Australia and you're not living in a city like New York City, I think sometimes people have this like preconceived notion that you're like living this like fancy lifestyle. And also like, I like fashion, which is so stupid when you think about it, because like, I love beautiful things. I love staying at gorgeous hotels. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love going to beautiful restaurants. In the same vein, I'm also like, throw me on a boat in the middle of nowhere. Also, I love that I'm on a boat, but I love boats, guys. Or like, put me on a hike. I want to be out in nature in the middle of nowhere. So, there's two sides to me. And I think it kind of broke my heart because in that moment, I realized that there was also insecurities at play for him in that, thinking that he wouldn't be able to give me what I wanted. But, despite any of that, after seeing him and having that apology, I ended up going to Tea Tree Lake because I was in Byron. So I went back to kind of one of the places where it all began. And I took myself there because I had the memory of him taking me there. And I knew it was a healing place. And I remember I was kind of floating in the lake. And I said to myself, it's time to let this go now. And I did feel like just this massive release in that moment. And I really do feel like every part of me knows this is a karmic connection, because I don't think you can feel that way with someone where someone feels so familiar if you don't have that karmic history. But I knew it was time to let it go. And I just lay in that lake and had the chapter close. And I think I'll always have feelings for this person and care for them, but it's not something that I think about as much anymore. And I don't have the pull that I used to have. It's like a more feelings of like love that you have for someone that you care about, like your friends or your family kind of thing. And if you actually look at what a karmic connection is, they're defined as these intense magnetic relationships that stem from unresolved past issues. And they often act as spiritual teachers, and they enter your life to challenge you on deep wounds and teach you vital lessons. And a lot of the time they can be, lessons that you also had with this other person in a previous life that you need to resolve in this life. And I really think we were likely in each other's lives in the past in some capacity, and issues were not resolved. I think the lesson that I always felt from him was just this love and kindness. And it was the most I'd had before. I'd had a pretty awful dating history and just really not ever being seen or cared for. And I think after just being treated so badly, just having this person just really see me, and I felt like I could really be myself. It was so special. Albeit he ghosted. There was thankfully still closure, and he apologized for that. I'm always about forgiveness if someone can take accountability. But I think, even in the apology, there was, kindness there. And I think it also taught me how you can really feel these things for people, but they're not necessarily meant for this lifetime. And I really don't think we were meant for each other for this lifetime. We clearly weren't, but we fell back into each other's lives in that moment for a reason. And there was something that needed to be resolved there. And clearly it worked because we've both found partners. And, I've found my wonderful partner, Jeffrey, and he has a new partner and a beautiful little baby. So very happy for that. But I think what is beautiful about this story and why I have such a beautiful memory and fondness, and it just makes me feel so grateful to have experienced it, is people just come in and out of your life for different reasons. And it's just so wonderful if you can lean in and experience these connections, because they don't necessarily have to be forever. I will forever be grateful for this memory. It is such a beautiful story with such a lovely human. And, I know he feels the same because we shared that with each other. But I feel like we often do get stuck in these strong feelings where you feel like you've known someone before, which means you think that they're the person for you now, where you're like, oh, that karmic connection, you think it's for now, instead of really looking at it as like a lesson and what's here to learn from this. And lessons don't have to be linear. They don't always arrive immediately. This happened in 2018 or 19, I think. I can't remember. But I'm still reflecting on what it was, what the lessons were and what it meant to me. And I think if you're someone who has this, or, has felt this with someone, or you're currently in it, just allow yourself to feel the depth of it, because I'm so glad I did, despite it being so heartbreaking and it taking me really years to get over, which probably could have been sped along if I had been doing therapy more. But I really am glad I allowed myself to just feel the depth of what was there with this person, and that they wanted to dive into it with me too. And I also wish I just kind of saw it for what it was, and that like I can have this karmic connection and live in it and be in it, but it doesn't have to be forever. It's bringing me to the mistake that I think we can all make with a karmic connection compared to anxious attachment or some type of attachment issues. I think it's a really fine line. And as I've started to think about this more, it's hard because I feel like when you look into karmic connections, they tend to be these very intense relationships with high highs and these immediate connections that do tend to falter out. So it's not necessarily surprising to me that some of these fall apart are likely related to attachment issues, because some of our most deeply embedded wounds are related to attachment issues. So if a karmic connection is this intensity, then clearly attachment issues are going to come up as well. So it's like not necessarily a surprise that they kind of couple together. And I think sometimes this is helpful in the second marker of distinguishing a karmic relationship between anxious attachment. Is your nervous system activated, or is it settled? And I think a real karmic connection, in my experience, feels like recognition, whilst anxious attachment feels like an emergency. So you can have both at play, but I think you're able to distinguish if both are at play. If it's just anxious attachment, you're not going to have that recognition and that kind of activated feeling or like the settled feeling of your nervous system. It's going to feel really intense and like you want to get out. And I think sometimes we think getting out is like, I really care for them. Because I've had moments where it's like, oh my God, I just like want to be with them all the time. But in reality, it's like, that's my brain being like, real bad person. So I'm going to explain a totally different scenario now. So I've had, again, this immediate visceral connection, like I said, have happened a few times where I feel like I've known them before. But upon reflection, looking at some of these, it really does feel different. And I think when you're in it, it's really hard to distinguish. But now I look back, when I talk about that first story, I'm clearly more grounded. It feels familiar. There's this deep feeling for this person that I cared for, and it feels very solid. And I think that's a sign that it's karmic and likely not attachment connection. But when your attachment style is flaring, it often creates a sense of anxiety, which can be mistaken for, I think, strong emotions. Your heart's racing, you feel on edge with excitement, which is really just anxiety over when you're going to hear from them or see from them. You're just constantly thinking about them, and it starts to feel like these deep connections and feelings you have for this person, when in reality, you're kind of in a state of anxiety. And I remember there was this guy I met in 2022 in New York. I met him the night he had finalized his divorce papers that day. I mean, this is so classic me. Who would not have seen that as a red flag? Clearly not me. And that I would just always attract the most emotionally unavailable men. It was unbelievable. But really, that was all my own stuff. Another good podcast topic is how I got over that. But anyways, I met this guy at this bar and I immediately am drawn to him. And again, I felt this very familiar energy, like I'd known him before. It got very intense very early on, and it was these just big emotions. And at the time, I felt like something bigger was going on. And I even remember speaking to my naturopath at the time and her suggesting it could have been some type of karmic connection, which upon reflection now, I do not think it was at all. I think I was in a huge state of anxiety. I was so stressed and I just wanted to be loved and wanted this to work out. And I just felt so on edge that I thought this was deep, deep connection. And I think that's where lines get blurred. Because when I look back on this and think of this scenario compared to the previous story I told, you can even feel it in the way I tell it. It feels just so, so different. And I wish I could share something more tangible other than the feeling of the energy of when I'm retelling this. But maybe what's helpful is asking yourself, when you do go back and retell these stories, which ones have more of an emotional pull compared to the other ones? Because maybe that can be the marker of it. I think even when I was prepping this episode, like I felt myself tear up remembering the stories in Hawaii in like a beautiful way. And then talking about this other story, I literally had no emotional connection to it whatsoever. That is not a karmic connection to me, I don't think. And I think when you're in it, which is probably more difficult to distinguish, something that I wish I had probably done is really asking myself and starting to really understand my own triggers with anxious attachment, which is my attachment style, whatever yours is as well. Because I think if I had understood what that was a little more, maybe I could have been able to distinguish between this is just anxiety compared to like a really deep connection, and trying to remove the feelings and really like look at this person as an individual. Which kind of leads me to my third marker for distinguishing between a karmic relationship and anxious attachment. When you kind of strip away the feelings and look at the person in front of you, is this someone who's actually available? And is this a life that could work with them? And is this the type of person I want to be with? Because I think so often, at least in my experience, I was just filling the box of having someone to be with rather than actually thinking if this was the right person for me. So this guy I was talking about was clearly the one before the second story I gave was clearly not in the right headspace to be in a relationship. And I think he was going through a lot of his own internal battles and demons. I could see that, and I just chose to ignore it because I wanted to be with someone, which I guess is kind of similar to what I did with my actual karmic connection, where I just ignored the fact that we lived on two other sides of the world. But, there was obviously something much deeper and stronger with the actual karmic connection compared to this one. And I think I would have saved myself a lot more pain if I had just thought about this second scenario in a way that was a little bit more realistic and really looked at it and what would actually work for me instead of just taking what was coming my way. But really, to the topic at hand, like I said, these karmic connections and relationships, I think, are a gift, and not everyone gets to experience them. I mean, maybe people do, but I think some people are scared of them and run away from them. But I think if you're open to it and really allow yourself to feel it, I think these arrive in your life for a reason. And there are lessons there, and there are things between you and this other person that need to be addressed in this lifetime. And I just urge not to get caught up in thinking this is a quote unquote soulmate. I think this term soulmate is just so bullshit, to be totally honest. You choose who you want to be with and you work at it. And just because you meet someone and you feel like you've known them your whole life and there's that instant attraction, that is not the sign that they're your person necessarily. I think it's the sign there's something there to be worked on between you, and allow yourself to both feel that. And I'm just grateful for the karmic connection I shared, that I was able to explore that and he was able to be open to that too. And we just really allowed ourselves to feel it and explore what it was. Sorry guys, the little doggy I'm looking after is barking, but I'm closing up today. And I think ultimately, I wanted to close on something that really connects back to what I shared at the start of this episode, is being in this cocoon period right now, and where I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I'm managing a lot, and I'm sitting in this really undefined time, trusting that the seeds I've planted will grow. And I keep coming back to the idea that things arrive in your life for a reason. And I think that's what karmic connections might have taught me, is it's not while I was like standing there watching him board the plane, and not in the years I spent trying to get over it. But I think eventually the lesson really isn't about him. I think it was about what I was learning to believe was that I deserved love. And those few days in Byron Bay, the recognition of it, the way he looked back, that he was showing me what the depth of this connection could feel like. And not with him forever, but just generally. And, now I have Jeffrey, and I've like been able to actually find that in a very deeper and quieter way. And, it isn't this like romantic love story of shooting stars playing at midnight on New Year's Eve. Although sometimes it is, because we love to dance, but it's, it's real and it's safe, and I can like breathe it in. And I feel like this situation I had just reminded me the type of love that you can find that's out there. And really, sometimes it doesn't have to be the real thing, these karmic connections. It's just something that's showing you what is there for you. So, if you're in one right now, or you think you might be, or you're still carrying one from years ago, I think just let yourself feel it and try and look at it as what it's trying to teach you. And then when it's time, just go lie in a lake like I did and just let it go. Because I think I held on for it for probably a little too long. But they really are a beautiful thing. And I'm really glad that I had it. And I think it's really interesting looking back and reflecting on the difference between the two, because there really is, it's so easy to just think that like you're in this karmic connection because you're feeling anxious, or you're in an anxious avoidance situation or something. And I just urge you to really like sit in the energy of it. And I think a lot of the time you'll get your answer on what it truly is. But speaking of things that are grounding me right now, ultimately, one final message for you all is this podcast is one of those things that is grounding me, which is why I wanted to end on a reflection and an ask. I started this podcast last year with Kat, my old co-host, and it was so great. And, we were learning the format, and it was amazing to be able to figure that out with someone. And she's gone to do her own things, and she's working on her book. And I've, moved into a solo format for those listening to season 2, and taken the show in a totally different direction. And I think I've found an even greater passion for it. So those that are listening, I think it's important for me to state how much it means to me that you tune into this every week, that this is truly my dream. I have never felt so creatively inspired and grounded, and just so in line with something that feels really right in my life. And I know you show up every week by listening, but other ways that you can support me, if you don't mind me asking, is if you haven't, please rate and follow the podcast on Spotify, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Subscribing to YouTube is a huge thing if you haven't done that. And then finally, share it with your friends. Any group chats, if you could send it through to your friends and tell them to start listening. Post on social and tag Note to Self. Anything helps, because really my biggest barrier right now is growing the audience. And the best way to do that is through word of mouth. And I hope I'm not asking for too much, because I know you already tune in every week, but I have a great listener base that I really value, and I hope that you can just keep supporting me. And I wanted to be really vulnerable in just how much this means to me, and that I'm really trying to make this into something. So thank you for being along for the ride, and thank you for always supporting me and Note to Self. And I will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.